She faced her billionaire husband in court after he filed for divorce and took their son, but what the judge said left him trembling in regret. If a judge asked the richest person in the room one simple thing, name the last night you stayed until morning when your child was sick, could he answer with a date, or only with money? If it were your life on that bench, would you bet a child's future on fortune, or on the person who knows where the inhaler lives in the dark? What do you call love when there are no cameras, no staff, and no headlines, just a door at 2 a.m. and a hand that keeps knocking? Listen closely, because in the next breaths you will hear the sentence that made a billionaire shake, and you will decide for yourself what a child remembers. If presence has ever saved your day, tap like and write, presence over money, so this story reaches someone who needs it. Now come inside the room. Interior. Family court. Late morning. Fluorescent lights hum like bees behind glass. The gallery is full. Coats rustle. Nerves breathe aloud. A wooden gavel rests on its block like a heart waiting for a beat. Mr. Vale, answer precisely. When was the last night you stayed until morning when your son was sick? A cufflink winks, then goes still. Your Honor, I would never neglect. A date will do. A woman in a dark, practical dress rests her fingertips on a slim folder as if checking a pulse through paper. She sits very straight. She breathes evenly, the way you do when a stranger's life depends on it. 2 benches back, a thin-shouldered boy clutches a sketchbook until his knuckles turn pale. Your Honor, may I speak? The woman asks. You will have your turn, Ms. Idris. Have you ever stood where wealth outweighed words and still felt the truth rising like a tide? In 1 minute you will hear the line that unseated a billionaire and safeguarded a boy's ordinary miracles. First, how the word presence walked into this story and sat down. Community hall. Evening. A banner droops from tired pins over a low dais. The coffee tastes like penance. The chairs are metal and sincere. We appreciate your pledge, Mr. Vale, the chairwoman says. But we do not vote on money alone here. We vote on presence. A murmur moves through the room like wind through reeds. One face does not change. A woman sits upright, jaw quiet, hands folded as if they are holding a small storm still. This is Naya Idris. Night shift paramedic. Guardian by paperwork and by choice. She can start in 4 in a moving vehicle. She can count compressions while tears fall into the collar of her scrubs and never miss the beat. She learned long ago that some rooms do not care about speeches. They care about who shows up. Ambulance bay. Night. A blue rig sleeps under a flickering bulb. A metal door sticks until someone who knows the trick leans a hip into it. Check the O2 tank. Check the glucometer. Check the drawer that thinks corners are ramps. A compact man with crossword eyes knocks the misbehaving drawer back with his knee. I see you trained it again. It respects boundaries. Occasionally. She smiles just enough to count. The rig smells like bleach and aluminum. A softened hospital bracelet rides in her pocket like a worry coin. Across the map, cameras move like curious birds around a man who learned how to bend rooms with vowels. This is Lucien Vale. Chef turned mogul. The grin that once sponsored knives now sells a life. He left this harbor town with a suitcase and a promise to send a key. Somewhere there is a velvet pouch that still remembers cedar and cameras. Somewhere a woman held that key and could not tell whether it opened anything or commemorated a door already shutting. 8 summers ago, rain breathed on the night market and put out fires. Skewers hissed and died. A young cook scowled at the sky as if it had broken a deal. A paramedic on a rare day off crouched, found a clogged line, and cleared it with a clipped straw and a steady breath. The flame leapt back like relief. You just saved 1,000 skewers, the cook laughed. Let me feed you before you fix the entire market. I'm easily bribed, she said, and bit her tongue because she had promised not to be charmed by anyone with hands that sure. Beside her, a boy did a small dance for lemon and coriander and smoke. The cook bowed with mock formality. "Lucien," he said. "Cook, busser, dishwasher, nightly poet of burned fingertips." "Naya," she said. "Paramedic, part-time sister, full-time warrior. And this is my quality control department." They orbited each other with late services and night shifts. Bowls eaten on curbs. Milk crates for chairs. The sea tested the wharf with gentle slaps like a metronome, counting them both in. He fed her things that tasted like an ant's garden wrapped around a street vendor's stubborn secret. She told him what courage sounds like when someone decides to live. He listened as if that sound could be learned. A talent scout arrived on the edge of their weather. A TV pilot. Chefs in old towns reinventing what is already good. He joked through the first interview, then woke up during the second. "I think they want me," he whispered into the phone at midnight. "I think this is something." "You're allowed to love the big thing," she told him. "Just don't forget the small ones." She meant the market aunties with extra chilies, the kid with the solemn rating nods, the boy who had learned too early to scan rooms for exits. She meant herself and did not say it. The pilot became a show. The show became a brand. He left for the city with a promise to send a key. A key arrived. It smelled like cedar and television. She tried to fit inside that world. A pop-up. Another pop-up. A studio where a publicist deliberately spelled her name wrong because it fit better in the host's mouth. He was kind. He was always kind. But the space around him changed shape. It hummed with production briefs and investor brunches and optimism that felt like a countdown. He kissed her in private and shook hands in public. He cried into her hair after a perfect taping and then took a call mid-embrace. Hours he owed to other people stacked like plates in a sink. Then one thin hour between night and morning, wet asphalt slid under a stranger's tires. By dawn she was a guardian. She folded papers. She sold a car with a melting dashboard. She tore a picture of a lake house from a magazine because the green made breathing feel available. She worked, studied between runs, and invented from scratch a way to be two people at once. He came home between seasons with a suitcase that still held hotel air. He listened. He cried. He slid an envelope across a table, money with the heat cooked out of it. "This will help," he said. "I'll be back for longer. I promise." Promises are scaffolds. They hold until weather tests the bolts. 12 weeks slipped by like a fish. The boy punched a locker. A landlord hinted about rent. She taped a siren together because parts were backordered through a chain of ships and storms. Apologies arrived in strings, a rosary of good intentions. He sent voice memos for stews that warmed bones and tricks to turn canned beans into comfort. "It's not the same as being there," he said one night. "But I'm sending what I can." "You could send yourself," she whispered to a quiet kitchen that drafted no reply. Years hardened in layers. The boy, Tariq, grew tall and careful. On weekends he rode to the pier and drew boats, not the boats themselves, but the way their shadows poured over water. In the city, Lucien opened a flagship and won an award shaped like a gold spiral he pretended meant nothing and touched often. On a friend's cracked tablet she watched him speak about flavor memory and anchoring innovation in belonging. When hosts asked about home, he smiled, looked down, and said he carried it in the way he seasoned. He returned twice in 4 years. Properly stricken at a funeral. Laughing at a New Year Street Fair grill where the line rebuilt itself as fast as he fed it. In a corner by a generator they talked while music thumped. The sentence he didn't say scraped the back of his voice as he hugged her. "Don't wait for me." She let him go because sometimes loving is choosing not to ask for a promise you know someone cannot keep. Then an ambulance failed at the edge of a marsh road. A woman with hands like pencils needed a machine that remembered how to speak. The defibrillator preferred the previous decade. Back at base, Naya researched grants, wrote between calls, and made a spreadsheet no one would ever thank her for. She asked no one for money. At sunrise she sent the application and fell asleep while gulls laughed at the world. A rumor put on shoes. A famous show was coming back to town for a Hometown Miracles special. Cameras arrived politely, sneakers whispering across linoleum. Lucian, routine logs, Naya said at her small kitchen table, pen nudging a column into order. School notes, counselor summaries, appointment receipts, medication times, the day he woke with a nosebleed at 4:20, the call I made at 4:22, the towel I warmed because he hates cold cloth. Jace handed her a stack of statements from people with names that have never been printed. I wrote mine crooked, he said. It still says what it needs to. The school counselor printed a 2-paragraph letter that avoided adjectives like a professional. The neighbor listed the morning she watched Tariq leave with a lunchbox that always returned scraped but empty. The pharmacist filled out a form with checkboxes that added up to care. Would you testify? Naya asked the chairwoman. I'll bring my own pen, the chairwoman said. Across town, Lucian's attorney built a wall out of phrases that photographs like to lean on. Stability. Access. Opportunity. Structured support staff. Continuity of care. The firm requested school placements with glossy brochures and proposed a driver who knew 100 routes to safety that did not include the one through a mother's kitchen. Stop, Lucian said finally, sitting back from the table of perfect plans. This reads like a restaurant renovation. It is my son. Then show up with evidence, the associate replied, not unkindly. Judges are human. They need something they can hold. He gathered what he had. Attendance sheets from the school he had actually visited, not the one someone suggested he donate to. A calendar showing Sundays circled and unbroken, meetings blacked out without apologetic arrows. Photos without lighting crews. A journal he did not intend to share in which he had written one line per night about the sound his son made when he fell asleep in a place that was not yet home. If you have ever kept a promise to yourself after breaking 1,000 to others, hit subscribe so you do not miss the rest of this story. Now step back into the courtroom where truth waits patiently for its hour. Interior. Family court. Late morning. The gavel finds the block and the room arranges its spine. Counsel, opening statements, the judge says. A smooth voice builds a staircase of words. Stability, access, opportunity. A home with superior schooling. Support staff. Continuity of care. Resources that exceed those of a paramedic with a good heart and a thin wallet. Another voice stands and does not climb stairs. A child lives in mornings and midnights. In who knows where the thermometer is when a fever staggers at 3:05. In who signed the permission slip. In who shows up. Today we show presence. The judge makes one small note on a page already more ink than paper. Proceed, the judge says. Ms. Idris first. Naya walks to the stand like a person who knows how to count compressions. Her hands rest on the rail. She takes the oath and the words sit in her mouth like a promise she already lives. What is a weekday morning in your home? The attorney asks. Wake up at 6, she says. He hates the first alarm so I set 2. Tea. Toast. The lunchbox I check at the sink for yesterday's sticky. He likes the smaller apple because the big one makes his jaw hurt. The inhaler is in the second drawer by the stove. The thermometer is in the mug with the chipped rim. We leave at 7:20 if it is a good day and 7:27 if it is not. I know the difference between a silence that means he is fine and a silence that means his head is loud. What does evening look like? Homework on the table, she says. He draws between math problems. We agree on the number of pages. I pretend not to see when he sneaks one more. Soup if the day was hard, something crunchy if the day was easy. Lights by 10. If he cannot sleep, I sit in the hall and tell him the names of all the people who will love him tomorrow. What did you do the night he collapsed? She answers plainly. I kept him here, she says. I used hands I trust. I did the job I do for strangers and I did it for my son. The new ambulance arrived in under 3 minutes. And a man who had once left stayed in the right way. A head turns very slightly at the defense table. A cufflink winks again, then stops trying to shine. What does presence mean to you? The attorney asks. It means you know which drawer the inhaler lives in when it is dark, she says. It means you know the difference between a cough that needs water and a cough that needs worry. It means you do not outsource the inside of a child's memory. The courtroom is a bowl that holds these sentences without spilling. Somewhere, a pencil stops scratching. Your witness, the judge says. The cross-examination begins with a compliment disguised as a question. You are clearly devoted, the attorney says. Would you agree that devotion is not the same as capacity? Capacity for what? She asks. For providing the best resources, the attorney says. Private school access. Elite tutors. A home with space to grow talent. If you are asking whether my home has less square footage than Mr. Vale's, she says, yes. If you are asking whether my son has less room to be known, no. Did you ever ask Mr. Vale for money? No, she says. Why not? Because I am not a fundraiser, she says. I am a parent. The attorney pivots. You work nights. Who watches your son when you are on shift? My schedule is structured around his, she says. On weeks when I am nights, my aunt stays. On weeks when I am days, I am home. I trade shifts. I do not sleep much. That is the price I pay to be in the room where my son lives. Is that sustainable? It has been, she says. It will be until it does not need to be. A small sound runs around the room, the noise people make when they recognize a truthful sentence and wish they did not. Nothing further, the attorney says. The judge looks down. The judge looks up. Mr. Vale, the judge says. Your turn. He rises and for the first time in a very long time, the room does not meet him with a lift of attention. It meets him with a level line. Mr. Vale, the judge says carefully. Define parenting in one sentence without using the word provide. Silence spreads its coat. He inhales. He exhales. To notice, he says finally. To name. To be there. His voice makes no attempt to gild the answer. A minute later the question that opened this day returns and sits down again. When was the last night you stayed until morning when your son was sick? His mouth opens. The lawyer's hand tightens on a sleeve as if squeezing a date out of cloth. I don't have a date, he says. I have a list of reasons that sound like excuses if I say them out loud. Noted, the judge says. If you're still with me, share one small way you will be there for someone this week. We are going deeper, and the next turn matters. He clears his throat. I can tell you about the night he woke in a place that wasn't home yet and asked if staying gets easier, and I said yes without knowing how soon, and I put down my phone. I can tell you about Sundays that are now a rule I refuse to break, and about the school I stood in instead of donating to. I can tell you I am different now and that saying it feels smaller than proving it. Show me proof, the judge says. He places a very plain notebook on the rail. 1 line per night. A record of small things. The sound a boy makes when sleep arrives. The sketch he didn't like and kept anyway. The day the soup tasted almost right because someone else named the salt. The judge tips the book open, scans a page, and closes it. Proceed, the judge says. We will take a short recess. The room exhales. Coates breathe again. The boy's fingers loosen on the sketchbook and then tighten, as if he had given himself permission too quickly. Naya rests her hand over the folder and looks at the clock, not because she is impatient, but because she has lived enough shifts to know what an extra minute can buy. Hallway. The vending machine stands ready to be predictable. A coin warms in Naya's palm. She feeds it to the slot and listens to the stubborn joy of something that works exactly as designed. A can thumps into the cradle. She does not drink it. She wanted the thump. Ms. Idris, Lucien says softly, stopping at the proper distance. I owe you an apology without a request attached. You owe him habits, she says, chin toward the boy sitting with the chairwoman. Apologies travel light. Habits carry weight. I brought a tape measure, he says, a rueful smile leaning on a metaphor. It has your name on it. That isn't how tape measures work, she says, and the corner of her mouth moves by 1 millimeter. He nods as if a verdict has landed. Thank you for the saline, he says after a pause. For the corners in the dark. Thank the chairwoman, she says. I just knew which door to try. He looks down the hall at the boy with the sketchbook. He looks back. I'm not asking you to say it will be okay, he says. I am asking if there is anything you need right now that doesn't require money. Time, she says. But no one can hand that over. We make it by refusing to sell it. The bailiff calls them back. Shoes whisper over waxed floor. The gallery reassembles its posture. The gavel waits for its next heartbeat. This is where the story turns toward a sentence that will live in parent groups and quiet kitchens for years. It will not sound legal. It will sound like something a grandparent would say. It will be the kind of line that sticks because it is made of common sense and consequence. And when it lands, a billionaire will finally tremble for the right reason. Interior. Family court. Early afternoon. The gallery filters back to their benches with the careful quiet of people returning to a room that holds something fragile. The air smells faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood. The judge's chair is empty for one more beat than expected, then filled again, robes settling like night. The gavel taps once. We are back on the record. A clock ticks with the authority of a metronome. Somewhere, a shoe squeaks and then decides not to. Call your next witness, the judge says. A school counselor with a lanyard and gentle posture takes the stand. The oath sounds practiced and sincere. Hands fold as if afraid to disturb paper. What is your role in the child's life? I meet with Tariq weekly, the counselor says. We discuss academic progress, peer dynamics, and emotional regulation. What have you observed? He is talented, the counselor says. He draws in between answers, not to avoid the question, but to listen better. His stress dips when routines are predictable. He reports feeling safer in the small things with his mother. He has begun developing a similar sense with his father in recent weeks when weekends are consistent and phones stay dark. Consistent weekends, the attorney repeats. Yes, the counselor says. He calls them no cameras Sundays. His words. Any concerns? Only this, the counselor says. He is 11 going on old. He is careful with hope. Adults should handle it for him where possible. Thank you, the attorney says. Nothing further. The cross-examination is respectful. Would access to elite programs benefit him? Access is beneficial when a child can carry it, the counselor says. Right now he needs both hands for belonging. Understood, the attorney replies. A neighbor testifies briefly. I see them mornings, she says. Toast in a napkin because he's always late. He still says thank you when she hands him the lunchbox. Some kids outgrow thank you. He didn't. A pharmacist checks boxes on a form the judge barely glances at and nods. The judge has already absorbed the information and moved it to the shelf labeled unavoidable truth. Mr. Vale, the judge says. You may proceed with your evidence. He stands. He has removed his watch, as if time needed to be less fancy for this part. May I speak plainly, he asks. You may not filibuster, the judge says. But you may speak plainly. He nods. I will not pretend I did not leave, he says. I left. I made a life that rewarded my absence. I am trying to unlearn it. If I could, I would give my son back 800 dinners and 1,000 small questions I was not there to answer. I can only give him the next dinner and the one after that. He gestures to the notebook. This is not poetry, he says. It is a log. 1 line a night. He laughed so hard milk threatened the table. He asked if I ever knew the names of the stars and I said no, but I would sit with him while he decides if he wants to. He slept at 9:42 and made the small whistle noise that means dreams are not combative. I am not asking the court to believe promises. I am asking the court to believe the math of repetition. Your counsel has highlighted resources, the judge says. You are highlighting persistence. Because persistence, he answers, is a resource you cannot hire. Understood, the judge says. Counsel, do you have any additional witnesses? The defense calls a household manager in a crisp blouse who looks uncomfortable under public attention. She describes routines implemented over the last month. Phone baskets by the door where devices sleep during Sunday. A rule that dinner is plated together instead of delivered. A chart Tariq decorated where squares are not tasks, but moments. Talked about the drawing that went wrong. Fixed a wobbly chair without calling a contractor. Went to the library and touched every book on the shelf like a ritual. Who made this chart? The judge asks. He did, she says. Mr. Vale asked what the boxes should be and the kid took the pen. Thank you, the judge says. Your Honor, the plaintiff's attorney says, rising with care. We request the court recognize Mr. Vale's home is now a stable and opportunity-rich environment. Noted, the judge says. Your Honor, the respondent's attorney says, standing with equal care. We request the court recognize that stability without presence is a facade that breaks under fever. We ask the court to place the child where the inside of his memory is already furnished. The judge leans back. The room holds its breath the way a town waits for thunder. Before I rule, the judge says, Mr. Vale, Ms. Idris, please approach the bench. They stand side by side the way hills stand beside rivers. Different shapes. Same landscape. Close enough to hear the judge's voice shift into something that belongs to living rooms and long porches. I have seen parents try to purchase what time denied them, the judge says. It always ends with a child who becomes a ledger. I have also seen parents who mistake exhaustion for virtue and forget that children require joy, not just survival. The law asks me to weigh best interests. The law is a scale that knows many weights. The judge looks at Naya. You are not performing motherhood, the judge says. You are doing it. You know where the thermometer is. You found the corners in the dark and taught someone else to touch them. This counts. The judge looks at Lucien. You are learning to sit inside ordinary time, the judge says. This counts too. But you came late to the practice. A pause lengthens, then resolves. Mr. Vale, you can fund a future, the judge says. But a child lives in the present. Presence is the rent we pay to stand in our children's memories. The sentence lands like a soft verdict read aloud by a relative at a kitchen table. A ripple moves through the benches that is not applause and not a gasp. It is recognition. The judge straightens paper that does not need straightening. The court orders primary physical custody to Ms. Idris, the judge says, voice now purely official. Joint legal custody is granted. A structured parenting plan is set for Mr. Vale with specific, measurable conditions that reflect presence, not publicity. The judge begins to list. 1. Sundays are sacred. Devices away by both parties. 2. School mornings should remain with Ms. Idris for the next 9 months. 3. Weekday pickups for Mr. Vale on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 5 p.m. are to be personally executed by Mr. Vale for 12 consecutive weeks. Delegation voids the day. 4. Night of care provisions. In weeks when the child is ill, the parent with whom the child is sleeping remains overnight without staff unless medically necessary. 5. The child's counselor remains on schedule. Both parents attend quarterly check-ins. 6. Any travel longer than 48 hours requires a co-written routine plan that names who, what, where. Not a staff roster. The actual who. Lucien blinks like someone relearning light. Accepted, he says, voice thinner but truer than earlier. The judge nods. I am not punishing wealth, the judge says. I am requiring presence. Children do not remember how much. They remember who. The gavel taps. We are adjourned. The room releases a breath it has been storing for an hour. People stand with the awkward grace of bodies returning to themselves. Papers slide into folders. A pencil, finally relieved, rolls to the floor and is caught by a child who finds it with slow delight. In the hallway, a reporter with a too-white smile spots Lucien and takes one step forward out of habit. He lifts a hand, gentle but unwavering. No statements, he says. Not today. Today is Sunday, the reporter says, checking a phone. It's Wednesday, someone corrects. The reporter blushes. The chairwoman laughs a laugh with no sharp edges and announces to no one in particular, every day can be Sunday if you treat it right. Tarek stands with his sketchbook pressed flat against his shirt, as if warming it. He does not look at anyone for a full 10 seconds. Then he looks at his sister. Soup, he says, a verdict of his own. Soup, she agrees. Lucien stands exactly where a person stands when they are welcome to approach but have not been invited. The chairwoman solves the geometry by walking between them and touching both shoulders like a conductor. Walk, she says. Nobody needs speeches. We need walking. They exit into a sky that cannot decide whether to be bright or considerate. The courthouse steps feel like the kind of place where a person could make a vow and have it stick. Ms. Idris, a stranger says, hesitating with gratitude that spills anyway. My mother is the teacher from that night. She told me to tell you she sleeps now without counting the ceiling tiles. Tell her I traded the reader glasses for a better cuff, Naya says, and the stranger nods as if given a password. On the sidewalk, a food cart sells things on sticks because the city never quite lets go of the street fair. Lemons sit in a bowl like a small sun broken into quarters. A teenager at the cart burns something slightly and looks at it with horror. Lucien steps forward, then stops, then steps anyway. Tilt your pan, he says softly. Let heat kiss only one side. Listen for the apology the oil will make. The teenager does as told and grins when the apology comes. The teen begins, then remembers the rule they didn't hear but feel. Thanks, the teen says instead. Sir. They reach the car. The inside smells like old toast and a crayon that went to war with summer. Tarek slides into the back seat with the deliberate movements of someone who has decided not to slosh whatever he is carrying inside himself. Do you want to come for soup? He asks abruptly, eyes on the window, voice casual enough to fool exactly no one. Lucien swallows. If it's okay, he says. If there are enough bowls. There are always enough bowls, Naya says, unlocking the door with a chirp that sounds like an amen. Kitchen. Afternoon turning into evening. The kettle clicks off. The table holds a stack of mail, a silver whistle, a pen with teeth marks, and a coin polished smooth by worry and gratitude. The soup is the color of comfort on purpose. Needs more acid, the chairwoman had said once at a fundraiser, peering into a pan as if it were a pattern. It became a house joke. Naya zests a small orange with the reverence usually reserved for rituals. He tastes a spoonful the way a person listens to a song they used to know. Texture. Temperature. The map of what should be there lights up even when the labels blur. Almost, he says. Name what is missing, she says. I can't, he says. But I trust you to. She squeezes a lemon over the pot. There, she says. Edges again. They eat. Chewing is an act of community. Bowls are lowered at the same time without choreography. Steam fogs a page of Tariq's sketchbook, and he lifts it absent-mindedly into clearer air. My counselor says I should say what I want out loud, Tariq says to no one and to everyone. What do you want? Naya asks. I want to sleep without deciding where I belong first, he says. And I want Sundays to be boring in the best way. Done, she says. On both houses. Lucien nods once, sealing it in a kind of agreement that needs no pen. I will mess up less loudly, he says. And if I mess up loud, I will fix it quiet. Tariq flips a page and begins a boat. The prow is a promise. Later. The chairwoman leaves with a slice of bread and the air of someone who will keep a secret by sitting on it. Jace texts a single word from the station. Soup. She laughs and sends back a photo of the empty pot with a spoon balanced on its lip like a flag. He texts a thumbs up that somehow means, I knew you would. The television stays off. The phone stays in the basket by the door. Lucien catches himself reaching and lets his hand fall empty. Do you still have that key? He asks after a while, voice careful. I have a drawer, she says. And that drawer has a box. I do not know which of them you are asking about. The key I sent, he says. I would like to apologize to it. It did not do anything wrong, she says. It pretended to open a door I never stepped through, he says. That seems like a sin for a key. She studies him. Keys don't sin, she says. People decide which doors they are brave enough to use. He nods, absorbing the sentence like a patient absorbing saline through a stubborn vein. May I earn a new key? He asks. Not to this house. To your time. To the parts one don't get invited to yet. I can sweep the porch for a while. Porch is like attention, she says. We can start there. He stands and finds a broom that has one fewer bristles than it wants. The porch becomes a lesson. People can be taught how to see crumbs and corners and leaves that hide behind table legs. He does not do it quickly. He does it right. When he re-enters, the broom is not a prop in his hand. It is a witness. At bedtime, Tariq hovers in the doorway like a moth deciding if the lamp is an invitation or a trap. Are you leaving? He asks Lucien. Not tonight, Lucien says. And not on Sunday. What about Friday? Tariq says, a scientist testing a variable. I have you Friday, Lucien says. I will be the person at the gate at 5. You do not need to scan the crowd. I will be where your eyes land first. What if a meeting? Tariq says. I will move it, Lucien says. If it does not move, I will quit it. What if the world ends? Tariq says. Then we will both be late, Lucien says. Together. Tariq nods. Okay, he says, as if stamping a small approval. Do you want the door cracked? Naya asks. Cracked, he says. So the hall can keep me company. They leave it open the width of a palm. The house shifts into evening's soft vocabulary. Pipes speak quietly. The refrigerator hums like a steady friend. A sketch of a boat dries on the table foolishly close to a glass of water and is somehow spared. On the pier the next day, fishermen make the fast jokes of people who learned patience by accident. Lucien stands by the rail with hands empty and for once does not look like he should be performing anything. A man with salt-drawn wrinkles recognizes him without ceremony. You said a thing, the fisherman says. About stories being about stories. I did, Lucien says. Was it true? The fisherman asks. It was for me, Lucien says. Now I am trying to be inside the story. The fisherman nods as if approving a recipe no one wrote down. Good, he says. Come Saturday. The gulls have an attitude problem then. He comes Saturday. And the next. He brings no cameras. He brings apples and a knife and the kind of listening that makes people forget they were suspicious. He does not ask for wisdom. He learns the names of knots and swears correctly at the rope burn on his palm. He goes home with a thumb he cannot stop flexing because it hurts pleasantly. He tells no one whose name would monetize it. He texts Naya a photo of the knot with a caption that says only, progress. She replies with a lemon and a check mark. It becomes their shorthand for edges found and held. Midweek arrives with the accidental speed of a bicycle on a slope. At 4:55 p.m. on Tuesday he stands at the school gate. At 4:56 he adjusts his stance because he feels like a model for parental catalogs and that makes his throat itch. At 4:57 he sees a boy who is pretending to not scan and immediately scans back. At 4:58 he waves without making the wave an event. At 4:59 a.m. teacher with a knit cardigan nods at him in the way adults nod when they decide someone might be reliable. At 5:01, Tariq steps close enough to be hugged and is hugged exactly right. Not as a stage. As an answer. What's for dinner? Tariq asks, performing normal like a virtuoso. Beans, Lucien says. But I will do them the way your auntie on Main Street did when I was young enough to burn every time I reached. With the green thing, Tariq says. With the green thing, Lucien confirms. And vinegar because your counselor says you like food that wakes up. Everyone is telling you my secrets, Tariq says, mock offended. They are telling me how to show up, Lucien says. Secrets would be unsafe to pass around. I am learning the difference. Thursday night, a cough enters the room and sits down. It is not the cough that needs worry. It is the cough that requires water and a hand on the back for 30 seconds. Lucien names it correctly. He gets the glass. He puts the hand where it counts. He does not text anyone to tell them he did it. He goes back to bed and writes a line in the notebook he did not know he needed. 5/Thursday, the line says. Cough, water, hand, sleep. On Saturday the three of them stand in the cannery, now an echoing promise of a school for teenagers who want to cook without being told cooking must become content. The walls smell like old metal and plans. A contractor points with 2 fingers at a place that needs reinforcement. Lucien asks about cost and then asks about time and then, catching himself, asks about participation. How many students can hammer this without insurance catching fire, he asks. 6, the contractor says. 12 if they are careful and the lawyer is asleep. They laugh. He looks at Naya. She tilts her head toward a table of safety goggles. He hands them out with the joyous solemnity of someone conferring knightship. Tariq puts his on and sees the room shift the way rooms do when a child understands that this space might belong to them too. A donor calls that evening wanting naming rights. He says no. He says it gently, with thanks, and no. He does not explain on social media why he said no. He does not explain at all. He hangs up and writes a line. Said no because the room should belong to the kids who will make soups no one profits from, the line says. Said yes to a shelf where anyone can leave an ingredient and anyone can pick one up. Sunday. A table holds pieces of a puzzle of the harbor whose box was lost long ago. They finish it missing 2 pieces and decide to not be mad. Naya frames it anyway, empty spaces and all, and hangs it in the hallway with the pride most families reserve for diplomas. On the back she writes with a felt-tip pen that bleeds a little. We live with holes. We still make pictures. If this still has you, hit subscribe so you do not miss how this family turns routines into a kind of rescue. Share in the comments one small ritual you'll keep this week for someone you love. It matters more than you think. Evenings pass. He cooks without tasting exactly and trusts the mouths that can. He asks Tariq to name what is missing and learns to say thank you to corrections that do not end with fireworks. He takes a class in first aid unannounced and sits in the back and raises his hand only once to ask how to stop a nosebleed without frightening the person it came from. He does not tell anyone in the room who he is. He becomes someone else there anyway. One night the chairwoman visits the porch with a stack of index cards bound by a rubber band and a smirk. "Lesson plans," she says. "The board voted. You are teaching 3 Saturdays this fall." "Me," he says, pointing at his chest like a student caught at the window. "You," she says. Topic: How to listen to ingredients and people without interrupting them. Outcome: teenagers who can feed the town and themselves without being famous for it. He laughs, a sound that surprises even his own mouth. "I can do that," he says. "I know," she says. "Also there is a bake sale. Your job is to stay out of the way and lift heavy things. We know your type." He bows, mock formal, and she clips him on the ear like a nephew. By the time the leaves think about changing, the court order is no longer a foreign language pinned to a refrigerator. It is a calendar they actually live. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 5 are as dependable as sunrises. Sundays become boring in the best way. Fevers get answered by the person in the house without debate. The counselor's office turns into a place where progress is measured by the number of minutes between thought and speech, and those minutes get smaller. He trembles again once, not from fear of losing, but from the stubborn joy of being allowed to stay. It happens in a grocery store aisle where they argue about brands of cereal and he realizes he is inside a moment so ordinary he would have missed it a year ago. He grips the cart and breathes through it like people do under big news. No one notices. That is the point. On a Tuesday evening, as twilight pours itself into the street and the cannery school pulses with kids who believe stoves can be a language, he wipes a counter that was already clean and looks at Naya. "May I ask you a selfish question?" he says. "You can ask," she says, rinsing a ladle till it shines. "Do you think there is a version of this," he says, gesturing to the table, "the sketchbook, the soup, the coin, the whistle, where I am more than useful?" She dries her hands on a towel frayed at the edges. "Useful is not small," she says. "I know," he says. "But I am asking about hope." She considers the pot as if the answer were hiding behind steam. "Hope is a plant," she says finally. "You do not yank it up every day to check the roots. You water it. You check the soil. You make a ritual of light. Then one day the plant is simply tall." He nods as if given a manual. "Okay," he says. "I will stop yanking." She looks at him, the kind of look that inventories dents and refuses to sand them smooth. "We have a drawer," she says. "We open it for 15 minutes a week and look at the dents together. After 15 minutes, we close it. We can try that if you like." He smiles. "I like," he says. "Bring a timer," she says. "We get sentimental if we don't watch the clock." They laugh quietly. The kettle clicks. The door stays cracked. Presence does the work presence always does when it is allowed to clock in without applause. Morning breaks like a soft apology over the cannery's red brick. The windows hold pale rectangles of light. Inside, tables stand in rows like patient shoulders. New stoves squat with the serious look of machines that will change how people speak to each other. A banner made from butcher paper hangs crooked and proud. A teenager with purple shoelaces has drawn a pot with steam that curls into the word welcome. The first class is not a class so much as a gathering. Parents leave slowly, eyes lingering at the door as if watching for lightning. The chairwoman moves like a benevolent storm, setting out aprons and name tags while pretending not to supervise the universe. A small bell sits on the central table, the kind teachers ring when the world is being asked to listen for 5 seconds. "Today we begin by learning how to listen," she tells the room. To ingredients. To each other. To the quiet between steps. Kids look uncertain at the idea of listening to onions. One boy with a chipped tooth raises a hand. "Do onions talk?" he asks. They complain, she says. You'll translate. She turns them over to the person with the quiet posture near the sinks. He does not wear his name like a billboard. He wears it like a spare button. He demonstrates washing hands without a lecture. He shows how to hold a knife like a promise to both the vegetable and to your fingers. He moves slowly enough that the least confident can copy without feeling late. If you're afraid, name it, he says, laying his palm flat on a cutting board to show the shape he wants. Fear gets bigger when it has to hide. Smaller when it is introduced politely. A girl in a sweatshirt that once belonged to two cousins says she is afraid of heat because her thumb remembers last winter's burn. He nods. He turns off the burner and puts her hand above the cool metal. He has her count to 10 with him. He turns the burner to low and has her count again from farther away. He turns it to medium and backs them up 2 steps until her body knows it can walk heat like a dog. Her shoulders relax. Better, she says, surprised, and the room nods with her victory. At the back, Tariq leans against a post with his sketchbook and draws how steam looks when a room starts to trust itself. Naya stands near the door with a clipboard she forgot she was holding. She is not here in any official capacity. She is here because presence is a verb that keeps volunteering. The first crisis is small and therefore enormous. Midway through slicing onions, a fight that began earlier in a different part of town arrives disguised as a comment about whose cousin owes who. 2 boys square off, bodies remembering how to make themselves into taller shapes than necessary. Pause, the chairwoman says, her voice gentle and not up for debate. Step into air, the quiet teacher says to the boys, and leads them outside where cold oxygen can do some thinking. Through the glass, Tariq watches the 2 figures draw a line on the sidewalk with their feet and then erase it with their hands. The conversation is short. It looks like the person who once thought attention was applause now knows how to use it like shade. The boys come back with eyes that are less interested in proving a thesis and more interested in getting fed. Aprons again, the chairwoman says. We do not cook while carrying anger. It seasons poorly. The second crisis smells sharper. A burner that was fine 30 minutes ago decides to develop a personality. A line of blue flame leans hard to one side. The room breathes in, the way rooms do before choosing to panic. Off, the quiet teacher says, already moving to the gas. Windows, he says to 3 kids with quick hands. Fire extinguisher behind the pillar, just in case, he says to the tall boy with the chipped tooth who wants a job that looks like responsibility and not like decoration. Naya reaches the control panel first because the word emergency in a building lights up the same parts of her brain as the word patient. She flips the cutoff with a push that feels like affection and authority combined. The flame disappears with the sound a lie makes when it is not invited to stay. The room exhales. The quiet teacher looks at her, a thank you without ceremony passing between them. The tall boy returns the extinguisher to its cradle with the reverence of a student returning a heavy book. The class learns 4 new words for safety and 3 old words for gratitude. They go back to onion. Today you will make stocks, the quiet teacher says. It is cooking's way of using what would be thrown away and turning it into backbone. A girl in braids asks if you can make stock out of moments. He looks like he might say no and then changes his mind. Yes, he says. We've been making one for weeks. They simmer bones and odds. They do not rush it. They learn the sound the room makes when waiting is respected. They add peppercorns like slow punctuation. When they taste, someone says, edges, and they all glance at Naya as if repeating a phrase they have stolen from her kitchen and bent into a shared tool. Tariq sketches pots like planets. Between drawings he checks his phone once to see an email subject line he has not opened yet. It contains the words congratulations and portfolio and camp. He locks the screen again and puts his hand flat on the page until the muscle in his thumb stops doing that nervous thing. At break, the chairwoman sits next to him on a bench and unwraps a sandwich that looks like it has been sat on by a committee. She hands him half in the way grandmothers pass advice. My email, he says, eyes on the floor as if the words might keep flying if he looks directly. I think the art camp said yes. Do you want to know for sure or want to live in maybe for another hour, she asks. He considers. Maybe, he says. Hope tastes better when it's still hot. I respect that, she says. I will sit beside you and not check it for you. He nods, relieved by being left alone on purpose. After 2 minutes he unlocks the phone anyway because human. He reads. He reads again. He hands it to her with the reverence reserved for holy texts and very good jokes. Full scholarship, she reads aloud, matter of fact. Program in the city. Start date in July. Optional track in observational drawing or mixed media. She looks at him. You will have to choose. He exhales with his whole body and then inhales it back again. Choices are loud, he says. They get quieter when you name them, she says. Say both out loud. Observational drawing, he says, and the room leans in to listen. Mixed media, he says, and the world considers how people become more than one thing. He closes his eyes. He opens them. Drawing, he says, like choosing a shore. Approved, she says, stamping the air with an imaginary seal. Now the porch conversation. What is the porch conversation, he asks. The one you have on a porch when you are afraid to be excited because joy has been disrespectful in the past, she says. You invite joy to sit anyway. You give it something to drink. It stops knocking on the door and starts behaving. He smiles shaky and victorious. He stands and looks across the room to the two people who are learning how to share air again. He walks to them and puts the phone on the table with the screen bright. You were right, he says to Naya. You said it would be a yes or a not yet, and either way we would know what to do next. What do we do next, she asks. We buy a pencil, he says, deadpan. She laughs. We can do better than that, she says. He turns to Lucien with his face arranged in the careful neutral he uses to avoid surrendering more than he can afford. It's in the summer, he says. Weekdays. It's in the city. It says something about dorms and I don't know if I want to sleep there or not. I hate new air at night. That's negotiable, Lucien says. We can commute if you want to come home. We can try 1 week in the dorm and see if you like its gravity. We can talk to kids who have gone. We can make sure the air in the room smells like something you already trust. What does air smell like that you trust? Tarek asks, testing. Soap and paper, Lucien says. Warm shoes by the door. The evening you get to keep instead of the evening that takes you. That's a weird answer, Tarek says, pleased. I am practicing, Lucien says. They build logistics on a napkin like architects of ordinary miracles. Naya writes bus times. Lucien writes his work calendar with solid circles around the afternoons he will move. Tarek writes the dates he will pack more carefully than is necessary because the act of writing makes the weeks real without the pressure of feeling large. Midway through the month, the cannery school opens its doors officially to the town. The sign says common pot because no one could convince the chairwoman to accept anything fussier. The room smells like onions and possibility. At a table near the back, a roster of volunteer slots fills up in handwriting that looks like applesauce and like law school and like a long life of fixing engines. 2 teenagers in matching hoodies argue amiably about whether cilantro tastes like soap. The vote ends in a draw. The room forgives them both. A woman from the paper arrives with a notebook and the careful smile of someone who wants to get it right before anyone accuses her of getting it wrong. She asks if she can take a picture for the story. The chairwoman says yes, but only of hands. The photo, when it runs, is 3 frames of hands doing, 1 stirring, 1 slicing, 1 washing. A 4th frame is a hand on someone's shoulder that clearly said thank you in the language of touch. The caption reads, "A town practices presence." On the second Saturday, a man from a network writes an email with the subject line Season 2 Revival. He praises the arc. He dangles budgets like ornaments. He writes the word redemption twice because he knows where eyes linger on a screen. The email forward lands in Naya's inbox because one address on his CC line is older than his strategy. She reads and sits with it for a minute. She walks it out to the porch where Lucien is learning the meditative satisfaction of sweeping leaves in a way that gathers more than it scatters. "You got an invitation," she says, and hands him the screen. He reads. He reads again. He looks at her as if the porch planks are spelling something. "I don't want to do it," he says. "I want to stay unrepaired in public so I can repair in private." "Then say no," she says. He types 3 sentences and a thank you. He sends it. He does not take a picture of the sent screen. He goes back to the broom. He writes one line that night. "Said no to the kind of yes that used to define me," the notebook says. "Said yes to sweeping." The next crisis is not loud, which makes it more dangerous. A student fails to show up 3 classes in a row. The attendance sheet marks a small absence that feels like a missing tooth in a smile that had been getting bigger. The chairwoman calls a number that goes to a voicemail that sounds like a joke told by a person trying to not sound tired. Naya checks with a friend at the clinic. Lucien texts no one because there is no one for him to text in this web yet, and that fact bothers him the way splinters bother good wood. On the 4th absence, the kid arrives late with a face that has learned something it did not want to. The room treats them as if nothing is unusual, which is how safety gets smuggled back into a body. Midway through julienning, the kid's hands begin to shake. The knife becomes a mirror of a week where everything cut too close. "Step into air," the quiet teacher says, as if this were a drill and not a rescue. Outside, the kid sits with a back against brick. Naya stands near enough to be useful and far enough to be unthreatening. The chairwoman produces a bottle of water from a pocket that seems to hold ladders and holidays and cats. "I didn't come because I couldn't leave a person," the kid says in a voice that tries to be older. "No one stayed with me when I was small, so I stayed this time because I am not small now." That is a sentence that already knows how to be a parent, the chairwoman says. "We can build you a plan," Naya says. "Not the kind that traps you. The kind that makes space." The kid does not cry because some people do not have that option while their body decides whom to trust. The kid nods. An appointment appears on a calendar without making a fuss. A neighbor's car becomes a training hospital for a new kind of lane. The room makes accommodations quietly like a family that has learned the value of moving furniture before a guest arrives with a limp. By late spring, the cannery's air has a stubborn sweetness that the neighborhood begins to count on. People wander in for classes and wander out with recipes and habits that stick. An old man who never stopped being handsome learns how to make broth that forgives him for not cooking for 40 years. A teenager who thought they hated their hands learns to love how their hands insist on being useful. A portfolio of small joys starts to accumulate in drawers and on refrigerators and in the backs of minds that were previously only keeping score of what went wrong. On a Thursday, the school counselor invites both homes to a quarterly check-in. They sit on the small couch that eats spines and agree to be honest without performing it. The counselor asks for a high and a low from each. "High," Naya says. Tariq chose drawing. He told Joy to sit on the porch but then let it come in for dinner. "Low," she says. "I feel the hours in my bones. I hide the feeling because I don't want exhaustion to look like doubt." "Permission to be a person," the counselor says. "Granted." "Hi," Lucien says. "I can name coughs at 2 in the morning without turning on the light. I can put my phone in a basket and leave it there while the basket keeps breathing without me." "Low," he says, and does not look at his shoes. "I am ashamed in new ways. Not about what people saw. About what my son saw." "Shame can be a useful teacher if it sits in the back of the class and keeps quiet," the counselor says. "If it starts to answer questions for you, excuse it into the hall. Tariq goes last. Hi, he says, is that soup solves math? It is not logical. It is true. Lo, he says. My brain still wants to check whether the door will open if I need it, even when it's not locked. Doors that stay cracked will teach your nervous system, the counselor says. You're already doing it. Outside, on the steps, they watch a boy hop from tile to tile as if playing a game he is winning. Lucien rubs his thumb the way a man rubs a wound he would rather not heal too fast because it teaches him something. He looks at Naya. I am interested in possibility, he says, careful like a person rolling a glass across a table. Not in naming it prematurely. She meets the sentence with one of her own. Possibility behaves better when it is not asked to perform, she says. We are doing fine. He nods. Fine is a good word in her mouth. It has weight instead of apology. June arrives with a carry-on full of daylight. The cannery hosts an open house where the teenagers cook for anyone who walks in the door. The menu is simple and arrogant in that pure way food gets arrogant when it knows it is good without decorations. A cabbage salad that tastes like respect. A stew that admits its ancestry. Bread that didn't rise perfectly and is served anyway because perfection is a boring god. Tariq stations himself at a long table with a stack of index cards and an uncapped pen. He draws tiny boats in the corner of each card and writes in small letters what went into each dish. People take the cards home and later find them on nightstands and bulletin boards and junk drawers, each one a GPS coordinate of a day when a town ate its own work and liked it. In the back, Naya finds a moment alone to breathe. She leans against a pillar and lets her head touch wood. Lucien appears without fanfare and stands beside her without asking the air to shift. They watch a teenager hand a plate to the chairwoman and wait to see if the chairwoman will say the words. Needs more acid, the chairwoman says, and the room laughs. It is not mockery. It is tradition. Do you want to hear something I haven't said out loud, he asks. You can say it, she says. And you can leave it on the pier if it decides not to come home. I am happy, he says, as if confessing to a minor theft from a store that forgot to put a price tag on a necessary thing. Good, she says. And I am scared, he says. Also good, she says. You are alive. He looks as if permission is an oxygen mask he had not allowed himself to accept. I am trying to decide if I am allowed to want more than this, he says softly. I know I am allowed to want to parent well. I am asking about the other kind of want. You are allowed to want, she says. Want does not obligate me. It merely tells the truth about your inside. That is fair. He lets the truth sit. It behaves. A week later, Tariq stands in the doorway holding a duffel that weighs exactly what it should. The camp schedule is printed and folded into a pocket. 2 pencils ride behind one ear. He looks less like a boy marching to the gates of adulthood and more like a kid going to draw in a room where the windows understand him. Do you want to sleep there tonight or come home? Naya asks. He scans the room he has not yet seen. The desk has a stain shaped like a state. The bed has the institutional hope of a mattress that will hold many backstories without judgment. He sniffs the air like a scientist. He puts a hand on the wall as if checking a pulse. He sets the duffel down. I will try one night, he says. If the air misbehaves, I will whistle. She hands him the silver fish. Call and we come, she says. Not later. Now. Lucien installs a rule in front of Tariq that is generous and suspicious. If you call me and I do not answer in 2 rings, he says, you get to write on my wall with a marker. Permanent, Tariq says, testing the boundary for its humor. Permanent, Lucien says. I will frame it. You can call me liar when you come over if it isn't there. The first night is okay, which is as good as excellent when you account for nerves. The second night is less okay. At 10:40, the whistle shrieks quietly through a phone speaker and two adults in separate places pick up in one ring. The drive is quick because the distance has been practicing being short for months. Tariq sits on the curb with his knees up, not crying, not performing, just needing someone to measure distance differently. Home, he says when the car door opens. Home, they say together. They do not interpret it as failure. They interpret it as calibration. The next day he returns carrying two familiar pillows and a small fan that smells like the family's hallway. He sleeps through. By the end of the week he has chosen 3 kids to like and 1 to avoid and 1 adult to trust if needed. He has learned the cafeteria's particular cruelty to toast and how to ask for it back without apology. He has drawn a boat entirely from the shadow, a real boat cast at 3 in the afternoon, and learned that drawing shadows is like writing a story about a story, which is to say it is harder and sometimes truer. On Friday, he comes home talking in paragraphs. They sit on the floor and let him spill. He tells them about a teacher who said, "You cannot fix your lines by hating them," and how his hand began to forgive itself. He tells them about a kid who cried and pretended not to, and how another kid put a glass of water within reach and did not look. He tells them he wants to commute on Tuesdays and Thursdays and sleep there the other nights. Approved, Naya says. Calendar updated, Lucien says, already dragging his thumb across a square like a promise made visible. Summer pours into afternoons with the kind of generosity that makes people forget winter ever had a case. The cannery hosts a potluck where the only rule is that dishes must be named after verbs. A casserole arrives named stay. A salad arrives named listen. A pie arrives named try again. The chairwoman brings something without a label, and when asked what it is called, she says, "It's called you'll see," and refuses to elaborate. People eat it quickly to test the hypothesis. It tastes like peaches and a secret you are glad someone kept. One evening, after the potluck, after the chairs are stacked, after the last kid has been picked up by a cousin who is learning the weight of consistency, the 3 of them remain in the echo. Tariq doodles on the back of a schedule, not boats this time, but the bell on the table and the way it looks like it could call an army if someone taught it the right word. Lucien leans against the island. He looks at Naya as if the question he is carrying has learned to walk. "May I make a proposal?" he says. "Words are free," she says, with the warning that not all offers are. "Not a marriage proposal," he clarifies, and his mouth half smiles at the courage and restraint that sentence requires. "A life proposal. A version of a key. No velvet. No ceremony. A calendar and a vow." "Say it," she says. "I want to move here," he says. "Not into your house. Into a house I will not decorate for magazines. A house with bad lighting that I will slowly make good by replacing bulbs and rituals. I want to live within hearing distance of your door so that when you whistle I can pretend to be casual as I arrive in 30 seconds. She looks at the space between them. She counts dents with her eyes. She lets silence do the arithmetic. "I can agree to a radius," she says. "I can agree to dinners that make calendars lie in a good way. I cannot agree to anything that would make the boy feel his life got small. I am asking to make it larger by making distances shorter," he says. "I am willing to be the person who rents a truck and carries a couch and asks for nothing in return except perhaps to be told where the wrench lives. The wrench lives in the drawer the spoon thinks it owns," she says automatically, and that sentence feels like intimacy more than any jewelry could. He nods through a laugh. "There are things I won't ask," he says. "I won't ask for us to dress history as something else. I won't ask for forgiveness that would require you to forget. I won't ask to be family faster than the boy can absorb it. I will ask to be allowed to keep showing up until the word family does not trip anyone on the way to the kitchen." She runs her finger around the rim of a cup, listening to the song it makes. "You can rent the house 3 streets over," she says. "The one with the roof that looks like it apologizes when it rains. The woman who used to live there planted mint that has taken the yard hostage. You can spend a month losing to mint. It will humble you. I deserve mint, he says, solemn and delighted. A month later he moves into the little house with the roof that is more honest than pretty. He buys a ladder he absolutely has to learn how to use without a crew. He plants a lemon tree even though the climate will require begging. He lets the mint win. He learns where the hardware store hides the good screws. He invites no one to photograph his life. He invites people to eat it. One dusk, he is on his porch wiping rain from a chair when Tariq rounds the corner on a bike that no longer squeaks. The boy stops, stands, says nothing. He looks at the porch like a map of outcomes. He tilts his head like a gull that cannot decide whether to steal a fry. He walks his bike up the short path and leans it against the rail as if testing durability. This is okay, he says, gesturing at the porch, the house, the world. It is, Lucien says. Can I draw from here? Tariq asks. Yes, Lucien says. You can draw from anywhere. That's why drawing is rude. It takes without asking and gives back something better. Tariq snorts. He sits on the step and draws the lemon tree that is mostly hope. He draws the gutter's awkward angle. He draws a porch light that will need replacing and writes a small note to himself in the margin to remember to replace it. He draws the doorbell as if teaching it to behave. Later, when the evening knows its lines, Naya walks up the path carrying a covered pan, not because she thinks he cannot cook, but because presence is easier to accept when it arrives disguised as dinner. She puts the pan on the porch table. She looks at the lemon tree. It's going to be rude for 2 years and then apologize, she says. I will accept the apology, he says. They eat under a sky still deciding whether to be dramatic. A neighbor waves by accident and then, realizing it was accidental, waves deliberately. The chairwoman passes on the other side of the street with a bag of index cards and a loaf of bread wrapped as if it was leaving for college. She does not cross over. The moment does not need a narrator. It needs witnesses. When the plates are empty and the porch has learned yet another version of the word home, Naya sets a timer for 15 minutes. They open the dent drawer. They name a past mistake with exact nouns. They note a habit that is late but present. They mention a day that still stings and agree not to poke it unless it misbehaves. When the timer dings, they close the drawer. They do not keep talking out of momentum. They let the ritual build muscle. Night deepens into the kind that trains lungs. Tariq falls asleep sprawled across 2 chairs he has dragged together like a bridge. Lucien carries him inside the small house that smells like new paint and an old book and thinks, not for the first time, that the most luxurious thing he has ever owned is the right to be here for this wait. He writes a line on a scrap of paper because the notebook is in the kitchen. Presence is the rent, he writes, and pins it to the corkboard where menus used to go when everything was a performance. Pay daily. A storm begins the way people begin arguments they do not intend to finish. The sky pulls on a dark coat. The harbor shrugs. A first line of rain arrives with polite knuckles and then stops pretending to be polite. Wind pushes sideways, which is always a bad sign in places where roofs rely on vertical manners. The cannery's red brick wears the weather like memory. Inside, the common pot smells like onions deciding to be sweet and steel that has agreed to be useful. A class is mid-chop when the lights flutter twice and then decide to hold. The chairwoman looks up as if scolding a child. The lights reconsider and steady themselves. Windows latched, she says. Gas check, he answers, already at the valves. Roll towels, Naya adds. Door bottoms. Teenagers move in practiced chaos. Aprons tie tighter. A boy with the chipped tooth lifts a crate of potatoes that looks heavier than his admission of fear. A girl with braids lines the sill with folded towels that used to be shirts. A text arrives on Naya's phone. Station on standby. Flood watch at the Marsh Road. She breathes once, the way professionals do when the air starts inventing reasons to run. Tonight's menu is sandwiches, she announces. Wrap and stack. People will be hungry in 6 minutes. They turn roast chicken into generosity. They turn lettuce into architecture. They turn fear into assembly lines that do not yell. The bell on the central table rings once and not again because it has been taught manners. Wind hammers. The door rattles as if asking to be let in without knocking. The chairwoman walks to it and pats the wood as if calming a horse. Not yet, she tells it. Let us gather first. The first people arrive wet and apologetic. They stand just inside as if their shoes might betray them. The common pot takes their coats and hangs them like offerings. It gives them sandwiches, which are not small things when the world outside wants everyone to think about fragility. Is the generator ready? Naya asks. It is, he says. And if it isn't, we will pretend it is until it believes us. The second wave arrives not as guests but as neighbors carrying items that have learned new names. A cooler that wants to be a table. A lamp that wants to be a lighthouse. A dog that wants to be a therapist. The teenagers assign chairs the way surgeons assign instruments. A transformer pops somewhere like a rude hand clap. The lights open and close their eyes twice and then decide to nap. The room inhales. The generator coughs, thinks, coughs again, and then remembers the job it was hired to do. A low hum fills the cannery like reassurance. Roll call, the chairwoman says. People and pot on the left, blankets in the middle, dogs and nervous poets on the right. Someone laughs in the back, which is the sound storms fear the most. Water finds seams because water is a professional. A trickle becomes a line becomes a confession at the baseboards. The room shifts tasks without telling its joints. Towels march like soldiers. Teenagers become dam engineers. The chipped tooth boy discovers he is good at deciding where wet should not go. On the second hour, the door opens and Jace arrives with 2 EMTs who look like men who have put down heavy things all day and intend to keep doing that. He carries a thermos like a relic. He nods at Naya. He nods at the generator with the grudging respect of a man who knows machines. He speaks low. Marsh Road is holding and then not holding and then holding. We may have guests. Beds, the chairwoman says, as if the common pot only needed a suggestion to sprout them. An old man who never stopped being handsome declares that the floor can be made to feel like an ant's couch if you line it properly. 10 minutes later, the floor is a quilt made of other people's good intentions. The room begins to look like a living room that cannot be contained by walls. Around 10, Alik finds religion above the pantry and begins to testify loudly. He climbs a ladder that has opinions and persuades the ceiling to stop evangelizing into the flour. At the base of the ladder, Tariq holds it steady with both hands and the kind of concentration that makes room for trust. Okay, Tariq says when the drip becomes a polite drip. Okay. At midnight, a teenager's father arrives without speech. He stands in the doorway like a question and then like an answer. He puts 2 loaves of bread on the table and then his head in his hands. Someone brings him water. Someone else brings him a napkin as if feelings were a kind of soup. Naya moves through the room like a conductor who knows strings from brass by the sound of their panic. She checks pulses. She checks breath. She checks on a pregnant woman who looks like she has been told to wait her entire life. You are safe, Naya says, which is not a promise she offers carelessly. The woman nods and believes her. Near to, the back door stutters against its frame like a person with cold hands asking to be let in. When it opens, it admits the Marsh Road, a fisherman with eyes like tide charts, and a boy who used to pretend he was not scared and is now too tired to pretend. Caught here, the chairwoman says, pointing with her palm. Soup, he says, pointing with his whole body. Soup, Lucian agrees, already ladling. It is a long night of small rescues. Tarp over the shelf. Bucket under the regretful seam. Quiet jokes about the gulls filing lawsuits for rain invasion. Teenagers make coffee that somehow does not taste like panic. Someone sings, not well, but with conviction. The common pot holds. Toward dawn, wind decides it has said enough and goes to find another audience. Rain finishes its statement. The harbor exhales and pretends it knew all along how the speech ended. People sit up from quilts and apologize for being asleep in public, as if sleep were not a community sport. The door opens one last time and the storm's final act enters sheepishly. The generator sputters and decides to nap for real. The room blinks into honest light as the grid remembers duty. Someone claps once. Someone else joins. It becomes a gentle round of thanks that does not need a conductor. Roll the towels, the chairwoman says, because the universe always returns to laundry. Naya walks the room like a foreman who inspects not for flaw but for praising the unfamous parts. She touches shoulders lightly. She says people's names because storms try to erase names and she will not allow it. Her body remembers the station, the ambulance, the countless nights where carrying weight beautifully is its own unphotographed award. He stands beside her with a face that has learned what competence looks like up close. He does not perform gratitude. He practices it. He picks up a mop with a handle a little too short and does not complain. He replaces one ceiling tile that gave up appropriately during the sermon. He hands out cups and gathers them back and washes them without breaking the rhythm of a room where presence has become the only currency anyone trusts. By 10 a.m., the common pot is itself again. The chairs have stories. The floor has a secret. The bell sits quiet like a veteran who will talk only if someone asks nicely. Inventory, Naya says, holding a clipboard that did not survive the night but refuses to accept retirement. Spent, he says, pointing. Saved, he adds, pointing elsewhere. Missing, he says, pointing at his own pocket where he finds the coin the chairwoman once pressed into Naya's hand. He returns it like a pilgrim returning a borrowed map. The chairwoman inspects his palm. You found light, she says. Keep it. You paid rent. He tries to hand it back. She closes his fingers over it with a look that turns it into a sentence. Don't argue with a nurse, she says. We win. The town recovers the way bodies do when they are fed good soup and given clean socks. The marsh road is scowled at by a committee that knows how to make it behave. Houses open their windows to invite forgiveness in. The common pot hosts a lunch that is half celebration, half debrief, and entirely loud. Later, when the room empties of crisis and returns to being a classroom with dreams, a conversation has been waiting politely in a corner. It steps toward them only when it sees they have hands free. We need to name us, he says quietly on the porch of the little house with the apologetic roof. We don't have to, she says. We can keep showing up. We can, he says. But I would like a word we can say that doesn't ask for permission to exist. The lemon tree does its best to participate by being green and ambitious. Mint overruns the corner like enthusiastic cousins. What is the word, she asks. He looks at the door crack. He looks at the chair with the dent where Tariq's knee always lands. He looks at the porch light he replaced and felt triumphant about. Family, he says. Not for what we were. For what we are doing. She considers, because words behave better when they are considered before being adopted. Family can be a verb, she says. It should be, he says. She nods once. Then we will family, she says, with commas the size of habits. He touches the coin in his pocket, a reflex now when the world leans in with questions. He breathes. I would like to stand up and say I love you, he says. But I am not sure if that is a sentence a person earns or discovers. Both, she says. You can say it. It does not bind me in any knot that would make me want to chew my way free. It just tells the room the truth about your insides. I love you, he says, standing as promised. Good, she says simply. He looks startled as if expecting a panel of judges. There is no panel. There is just a porch and a lemon tree and a boy drawing at the kitchen table. He sits. He waits. She looks at him with the particular tenderness of someone who knows where the inhaler lives and where the words must be kept for now. I am not ready to say it back, she says. I am ready to feel it without running. He nods, which is how grown-ups become predictable on purpose. Evenings grow long. Tariq's camp sends photos that he does not want to be online and they respect that. He starts dating charcoal the way some kids date chaos. He learns that hands can be loyal to more than one talent. A quiet ceremony arranges itself one Sunday when the calendar tried to book something else and was told to mind its business. It is not a wedding. It is not a performance. It is a vow that understands porches. They do it at the common pot because that room has kept their secrets and their soup. Chairs form a clumsy circle. The bell pretends to be shy and then allows itself to be rung once. The counselor sits quietly with a pen that will not be used unless someone needs a word. Jace arrives with a loaf so ugly the room cheers for its honesty. The chairwoman holds index cards tied with string. There will be no speeches, she announces. There will be sentences. She invites Tariq first. He reads from a card without punctuation like someone choosing to trust his breath. I want boring Sundays. I want to draw where people forget to perform. I want both of you to tell me when soup needs more acid and when I need more sleep. Naya goes next. I vow to know the inside of your memory, she says to her son, and to guard the door. She turns to the man who has earned a second noun in her mouth. I vow to name dents and keep the timer. He speaks. I vow to be within hearing distance, he says. I vow to pick up the phone and if I miss it to give you a marker. I vow to cook for this town without asking it to clap. The chairwoman raises a brow at him like an aunt daring a nephew to go on. He smiles, feeling the dare sit down politely. I vow to pay rent, he adds, tapping his chest where a pocket holds a coin that has learned everyone's names. They sign nothing because the law is already satisfied by other papers. They sign a calendar, 1 square each, which is how this family has always preferred to make promises visible. The square says Sunday, but what it means is room. They eat after, because of course. A stew that admits it forgot the time. Bread that apologizes for its shape and gets forgiven while still warm. A salad named Forgive Yourself. The room feels like consequence without punishment. The bell rings once on its own, a phenomenon everyone agrees later did not happen and also definitely happened. A week later, the cannery faces its test not from weather but from a man in a suit who carries a clipboard like it is a weapon and a smile like it is a shield. He represents a developer who likes the way the building sits near the water. He says words like activation and mixed use and opportunity as if he invented them. It would be good for the town, he says, which is always a sentence that requires a witness. The chairwoman offers him a sandwich. He refuses because refusing free food is how some people tell you they plan to change your kitchen. She does not argue. She sits. Your metrics, she asks. What are they? He says a list that belongs in a deck. Foot traffic. Retail conversion. Anchor tenant synergy. He relaxes because he is on home turf now. Our metrics, she says, and begins her own list. Number of elders who learn to feed themselves again. Number of kids who learn to teach. Number of nights the room became a living room when the world tried to convince us we were separate. Numbers written down are fine, she continues, but our numbers are written on people. He smiles like a man who thinks sentiment is charming on his way to irrelevant. The city owns the building, he says. We have a bid. Lucien listens for a while and then decides to stop behaving in the way television taught him. He stands. I have money, he says in a tone that could have opened doors a year ago and now only wants to keep them from closing on a community. But you cannot have it if it means the room stops being what it is. I will not help you turn this place into a place with glossy windows where people go to pretend to be seen. The man is surprised by being told no in a dialect he recognizes. He leaves. He returns with a representative who carries 3 binders and a pen that leaves very satisfying lines. The town shows up with sandwiches and letters and a lawyer who used to be a teenager who hated cilantro here. She wears a suit that says she still hates cilantro and will fight you about it. At the hearing, people speak like meals. Short sentences. Lots of flavor. No garnish that no one will eat. The judge, different robes, same patience, listens. The judge asks for proof. The proof arrives in hands and names and a storm report printed on real paper and a photograph of hands that once lined windows with towels. The judge rules that the common pot is special enough to protect, boring enough to keep, and necessary enough to fund. You are not a concept, the judge says. You are a kitchen. The town claps in a way that is modest and victorious. The clipboard man tries to smile like he meant to lose. He fails charmingly and leaves with a dignity better than he arrived with. He buys a sandwich on his way out and eats it in the parking lot where no one can judge him for liking being fed. Life arranges itself around the cannery and the little house and the home with the door that stays cracked. The lemon tree apologizes with blossoms. The mint continues its coup. The porch light gets replaced twice in 1 month because apparently some things prefer drama. He learns to change a breaker without calling a person with a van. He writes fewer notebook lines because now the days are full and remembered even without ink. He writes anyway, because habit. Tariq finishes camp with a portfolio that smells like effort. He chooses which pieces to keep visible and which to let teach him quietly from a drawer. He learns that art is not the same as praise and is not the opposite either. He laughs more often without checking to see if the room permits it. They do not get married. They do not get married. They do what families do when the interesting part is not the paperwork but the practice. They cook. They teach. They sit on a porch and let evenings finish their sentences. One night, when fall is pretending to be further than it is, they walk to the community hall. The banner dips like it always does, a frequent bow. The chairwoman is speaking her last words as head of the board. People applaud as if hands could love a person into rest. Presence, she says in a final voice that still knows how to hold a city block. We built a habit out of it. Keep paying your rent. She crooks a finger. Naya stands and is shoved gently to the microphone. She does not panic. She does not perform. She tells a room that used to scare her that she now lives there. We are a place that believes in showing up, she says. We found that the price of admission is noticing. We discovered we can be a kitchen. Let's keep cooking. He stands in the back with the chairwoman's coin in his pocket and the memory of a sentence in his bones. He does not speak. He is present. The room does not require anything more of him in that moment and he understands the privilege of being asked for less. After, they spill into a street that has decided to be kind. He walks to her with his hands in his pockets as if learning to keep some energy until asked for it. She spares him and reaches first, taking his hand like a person takes a tool they know how to use. Dinner, he asks. Stay, she says, and the word means not just tonight. At home, the table holds mail and a pen with bite marks and a coin they pass between them on purpose to remember luck is a practice. The silver whistle lies where it can be grabbed without being looked at. The kettle clicks off because it knows the script. They eat. They talk about the cannery's plumbing and the school's open house and a teenager who cut an onion like a letter and cried because no one told him that was allowed. They mention the lemon tree like it is a difficult relative doing their best. They open the dent drawer for 15 minutes and close it without dragging the conversation into the next room. Later, the boy wanders in with a drawing of a boat that is less about the boat than the way the once apologetic roof reflects in a puddle. He puts it where soup cannot touch it. He kisses a cheek because even cautious people can be brave by accident. He whistles once and 3 dogs in the neighborhood tilt their heads like scholars. He laughs. He goes to bed with the door cracked. They sit in the kitchen as if the light were a 4th person. The window shows the porch like a postcard from a place they live in now. He takes the coin from his pocket and sets it on the table. I like the sound it makes, he says, spinning it. It sounds like predictability, she says. It sounds like a machine that still takes coins in a world that decided plastic is tidier. I love you, he says, because he has decided practice is better than caution. I feel it, she says. And I am glad you say it where soup can hear. He smiles like a person who has learned to be given back to by the room itself. Tomorrow I teach kids how to listen to onions, he says. We are doing knife skills. Remember to tell them the best cut is the one that keeps all 10 fingers, she says. I will, he says. And I will tell them the second best cut is the one someone else taught you. Tell them the third best is the one you teach yourself quietly on a Sunday, she says. He nods. He writes a line that might be the last one he needs to write for a while. Presence is a recipe, it says. Salt with attention. Acid with apology. Heat with patience. Serve daily. If this story gave you something to hold, like the name for a small habit or the courage to keep a door cracked, tap like so more people find it. Share one line you'll live this week, something you can do that costs nothing and changes everything. And if you want more stories where ordinary people build extraordinary lives out of presence, subscribe and stay. The next pod is already simmering.